You're listening to Fox City's Murder and Mayhem, your bi-weekly dose of true crime history in a small rural community of Wisconsin.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Fox City's Murder and Mayhem. I'm Eric.
I'm Gavin.
Wow.
Yes.
I want everybody to know that he was super excited when he first got here about podcasting, and then as you can tell from that intro that he's not excited.
We're going to cast some pods today. We're doing it.
Don't lie, he wasn't excited.
He seemed like he was excited. That did not seem exciting at all. So we are also joined here by a special guest, one of our favorite listeners of the Fox City's Murder and Mayhem podcast, Tracy. Tracy, say hello.
Hello, guys.
Hello.
And Tracy also has a wonderful podcast that everybody should listen to. You want to tell them about that podcast?
Yeah, it is called Stigmas and Open Wounds, and Eric just happens to be my co-host. And we basically do a deep dive into some stigmas that are really against and about mental illnesses. And we kind of don't stay on that. It's a broad podcast, honestly.
It's chaos.
It is. It's chaos.
Which
honestly.
ironically is the reason why we have Tracy joining us on this podcast today, because she listened to one of our previous Fox City's Murder and Mayhem episodes, which was entitled Green Bay Chaos. And being that me and Gavin recorded this podcast 3 months ago, we're going to have Tracy actually give you the synopsis of what the episode was about, because she can remember.
Longer than that.
Yeah,
probably.
probably.
It was. I was really, really behind, and I caught up while we were on vacation. So yeah, it was the Green Bay Chaos one, if I recall what it was called, something like that. And what it was about, it was one of the unsolved ones, if I recall.
Which is all of them.
Yes.
Just so you know.
Yeah.
No, that's not. They're not all unsolved. That's not true.
And what it was like there was like a triangle something in it. It was like somebody
it was like the Triangle Gang.
Yes, the Triangle Gang. And what happened was they were threatening this gentleman and saying, you know, we want this money and do not involve the cops. And he's like, okay, sure, whatever. I don't believe you. And then all of a sudden he got another letter. And finally the cops got involved. And then there was a shootout between some cops because there were some cops that were undercover in the bushes. And then
to reiterate, I think, and remind me if I'm wrong on this, but those cops that were in the bushes, nobody else in the police department knew they were going to be in the bushes, correct?
Right.
Like they weren't supposed to be there.
What happened was they're just like, I think we're just going to get this bus. I think this is going to be our big thing. And what happened was there was a beat cop that was on duty that night, and they ended up shooting that beat cop, if I remember right. And what my thought was maybe these guys who thought that they were going to get this big bust, maybe they were the guys who actually sent the actual first letter. And they were kind of undercover, you know, they were cops, because what happened after that was nobody heard from this gang again.
Okay.
So you following that, Gavin?
Yeah, I'm following that.
What do you think of that? Before we go any further into this, let me clarify too that there is no evidence at all to suggest anything she just said. Okay,
right.
So we did not do a comprehensive investigation and come up with this thing. This is pure speculation.
Yeah, it just to me, all of a sudden I'm thinking, like, did anybody ever look into these guys? And they probably didn't, because they're like, well, they're police guys, no big deal, whatever. They have to be clear.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, I'm thinking, well, they were just there, and nobody looked into why they were there. They just thought, okay, they're going to get this big bust. Why were they there? And could it have been them? Because afterwards, it all stopped.
So now, and when I thought about this theory, one of the number one things I come up with, though, with this is that if they are the Triangle Gang or whatever they were called, if that's who these two cops were, why did they come out guns a-blazing when the people showed up?
Yeah.
That's the only thing I can think of, because in theory, you would have just laid low and waited for the cops to or waited for the money to be dropped off, go pick the money up, take off, right? In theory, that's what you would do. Unless they had already decided, because if I remember right, they sent multiple letters, and the first one was just completely ignored.
Right.
And then the second one was when they actually got the cops involved and went there. Maybe. I'm curious, Gavin, I know this is a hard thing for you to do because you're all about evidence, but it does raise an interesting... Because it does make a lot of sense that they just showed up there to get the big bus, but also it does make just as much sense that they could have actually been the Triangle Gang.
Right. It is interesting. As I recall, the story is these guys overheard it in the police station and they weren't supposed to overhear it. And then they decided on their own to kind of show up and make the bust. But we only kind of know that like after the fact. And everything. So the story of them overhearing it in the police station, like we don't know that happened.
Right.
So that does open the possibility that they heard it from another source, such as they did it.
Or they were working with the Triangle Gang, whatever it might have been.
That's true. So definitely that possibility is there. Eric, I think you make a really good point about the shooting thing now. Because it is weird because, again, as I recall, they basically said, like, put your hands up, freeze, and they start shooting, which doesn't really make a lot of sense for them to do as the bad guys.
Yeah, that is true. If they came out acting as cops, then I think that kind of throws this story into a loop. Like, it probably was more like they were just trying to bust this up with
so that is a tricky part of it, but I don't think it's a bad theory. I think there's definitely like putting me in this position again where you're like oh, we're gonna trick him to saying something bad about the cops. No
it was just something that came up and I'm like, well, everything stopped after this, like why were they there? There's just an alternate theory of well, these guys could have been.
Yeah, definitely. And, I mean, the whole thing is weird. We don't know why the guy who was targeted was targeted. We don't know why he was apparently the only guy who was targeted. We don't know why they just disappeared after this incident. So there are a lot of questions, and it does leave open a lot of possibilities for
And it almost does...
things.
It does seem like the fact that they never struck again would be that along the theory of that they realized, well, that didn't work quite the way we expected it to work, which would suggest that, these weren't, well, I mean, unless it was just somebody playing a gag on these people and sending them letters saying, you're going to die unless you give us all this money. But I don't know. That just seems like maybe one letter, but the fact that they followed up on a second time, there was some intent there.
Yeah, I think it was serious.
And then to never do it again would just suggest that it went horribly awry. But then again, maybe these two cops were in one shrub and the actual guys were in another, hiding behind another shrub. They watched really all this happen, and then they're like, let's get the hell out of here. What did we just do? I mean...
I'm not going to take the risk next time I could get shot up.
Yeah, I don't know. It's, it's one of, like, the many, many things where I wish we had more of the records. Like, these records are long gone.
Yeah.
We could get a few more pieces of the puzzle here that, didn't make, the newspapers and everything else. But it definitely, I mean, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions here.
And I think it is also fair to say that even though, because like you said, with this, you don't have the police files, correct?
Right.
This was just coming out of that book.
Yeah, nobody has them as far as I know.
It is also reasonable to assume that the fact that there were two cops there that shouldn't have been there, I would like to think that the police department at least looked into that to verify that were they just acting, like doing something they weren't supposed to do as cops to get a pat on the shoulder, or could they have potentially been part of this? I would like to think that the police department looked into that at least and followed that lead just to make sure. And we just don't know that because, like, it's just probably a little side note in the police report and obviously wouldn't make it into this book, or maybe this author that wrote this book that this story came from didn't even have that police report.
Right. Well, the author didn't have the police report either.
Author, okay.
I can tell you they didn't have it either.
So.
And, yeah, and there's questions. And you got to also come back, like, you really have to think the time period, how different this time period is. Mm-hmm. In the same episode, there was a cop who was doing his job out of uniform.
Right.
Because apparently he wasn't issued his uniform yet. This is before they had the radios in their cars, so they can't even talk to each other. They'd have to stop at like a bar and call back to the station or something. This is a very different era of how police work. This is like absolute bare minimum. Like these are not highly trained guys. I'm sure they have the shooting range and they train in that way, but there's no law enforcement academy
and stuff like that you're going through. Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point there too, is because, I mean, this seems really suspicious when we think of our era of police force. If you take it back to when it was, maybe this is like maybe a cop that was an officer on a police force in this era would be like, no, shit like that happened all the time. This isn't uncommon at all. But I thought it was worth at least doing a quick episode to just bring that theory to the forefront, because I thought it was kind of an interesting theory that we didn't even touch on in the original podcast.
So. It is an interesting theory, and yeah, I mean, I wish there were ways to really explore it. Like, I don't know, like I don't know how to really look into that much more. I guess what I could do, I mean, I can't do it here at this moment. I mean, we could look into those guys more and see whatever became of them, and
I think that would be an interesting thing to see, is if there's any trail of maybe you follow their trail down and you find a bunch of police conspiracy, fraud or something that they commit later on in life.
Yeah, maybe later on they're embezzling and they get let go from the department, and it's like, oh, okay, these guys were kind of shady. I don't know.
Yeah.
So maybe there's some clues we can pick up there, but just based off the story as I know it, I don't know. There's too many possibilities.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that was just a quick little episode we wanted to drop and throw this theory out for anybody to hear. If you do have your own feelings about this theory, hey, send us an email. MilwaukeeMafia@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what other people think. If you think that Tracy has just gone nuts, or if you think, wow, she might be onto something.
I'm not above revisiting this again.
Yeah.
That's fine. We can return. This is kind of fun to come back and re-explore older episodes. So sure.
Very cool. Yeah, and if you have another theory, if anybody has a theory about another episode that they wanted to throw out there, we'd love to hear those as well. So reach out to us, like we said, MilwaukeeMafia@gmail.com. And otherwise, we'll see you back on the next episode. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Peace.
Thanks for tuning in to Fox City's Murder and Mayhem. Join us in 2 weeks for another exciting episode of Murder and Mayhem.